One of the benefits to having a campaign exist in a pre-made setting is that the players kind of know what to expect. When you have a campaign that's set in Greyhawk, the players know what to expect. Same thing goes for Faerun, Dragonlance, Spelljammer, and the list can go on. Another thing they can do is it can allow the characters to attach themselves to the world. You can be from a specific region and then you can attach it to the history. This all adds up and really allows for the players to get immersed into the story. Which is where it becomes difficult when running a Zelda D&D campaign. The first one I ever ran, I just had it be set after Ocarina of Time, and I just used the Ocarina of Time map. However, the issue comes into play with this campaign is that I wanted to have a grander scope. In the Zelda canon, there's really only stated one kingdom, and that's Hyrule. There are others, but some are either on other planes of existence, potential dream states, and the list can go on. The only other one that I can recall off the top of my head that's stated to be on the same plane of existence is Hytopia, and I think even Hytopia got colonized by the end of Triforce Heroes. I could be remembering that wrong. I didn't play it that much. So the solution that I came up with, as well as I think a lot of people who tend to run Zelda D&D games, is I just created my own version of this world, because the games do confirm there is a world. Hyrule is just but one kingdom that exists in this world, and it's potentially an entire country. So what I did was I just created my own version, and I gave it a name. The name is Dinraath. The name Dinraath comes from the name Dinraal from Breath of the Wild, the fire dragon that we can see in various regions, who is also named after the goddess Din, the goddess of power for the Triforce of Power. So I decided, since she is the one in canon that created the world, I figured that the name should be named after her, so calling it Dinraath. To match this, I also gave Dinraath 2 moons. The 2 moons are named after the other goddesses known as HYRULE and HYRULE. HYRULE is the closest to Dinraath, and since it's stuck between HYRULE and Dinraath, that means there's a lot of gravitational pull on it, so HYRULE tends to be a little more volcanic in nature. There's also ring around Dinraath. It is more asteroid in nature. It's just a little element that I like to throw in there to help to make the world feel a little bit more foreign, and something that the characters can technically use in the world to help themselves navigate. Because, well, if they're in Hyrule, then the belt that they'll be able to see in the sky during the day and night will always be pointing south. So it's a potential way to help them navigate the world. As far as the rest of the world goes, well, this is the map that I made in order to help represent it. Another reason as to why the coastlines are so shallow is due again to the gravitational pull from the moons. The continents would be a little bit more island-like in nature and not so much built up like us. That's where basically the realism ends. From there are a lot of fantastical elements that can be seen. One such element that can be seen there is the Eye of Calamity. Now, as to why that appeared, no one really knows. However, it appeared about 500 years ago after Link and Zelda successfully sealed away Calamity Ganon. And yes, I said 500 years ago. When the campaign picks up, we'll be picking up 500 years after the events of an alternate Breath of the Wild. The biggest issue with Zelda is that the map is always changing, so I had to find one consistent map. And I know why they do this is because they want to give players the chance to feel like they have the ability to explore and rediscover Hyrule every single time, which is fantastic for game design and a nightmare for running a D&D campaign. So I figured, why not just make one big map with a lot of continents, so that way players can go around and explore and have fun doing so, and potentially even have multiple campaigns take place within this one world, not just this one. So we'll see what happens. Hyrule is classic. You can't really have a Zelda campaign if it doesn't take place in Hyrule in some capacity. While the world may be called Dinraath, the game itself will be starting in Hyrule. And here you have all the classic locations like Death Mountain, the Lost Woods, Castle Town. You even have things like Gerudo Town, Zora's Domain, and even Rito Village. I pull from a lot of sources here. Mainly, this Hyrule is inspired by the regions that can be found in Breath of the Wild. So you'll have things like the Tabantha Range, the Hebra region, and truthfully, this is where the bulk of the campaign will take place. It just feels weird to do a Zelda campaign and not have it take place in Hyrule, at least for the first go-around. As far as if there are other things that are located here, such as the Master Sword being located in the Lost Woods, who knows? But if you played enough Zelda games and you're a Zelda fan, I'm willing to say that there's a chance that the Master Sword could make an appearance. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. So for those of you who played Twilight Princess, you know that in the Arbiter Grounds in the Gerudo Desert, there's something known as the Mirror of Twilight. By the end of the game, Midna, the true Twilight Princess, shatters the mirror, thus cutting off connection between the Light World and the Twilight Realm. In my game, several hundred years ago, the Mirror of Twilight was rebuilt. The purpose was to reconnect the Twili and the Hylians and to create some sort of trade. Termina is from Majora's Mask, and yes, I am very much familiar with the fan theories out there that state that Link is dead in Majora's Mask, and Termina is an analogy to him moving on to the afterlife and accepting his death in the Lost Woods. For the purpose of this game, I'm obviously not acknowledging that theory and saying that no, it is a real place. In fact, it's on this material plane. And even IGN Inuma has gone on record saying that's not the case for Majora's Mask. Link is very much alive. And Twilight Princess kind of hints at this, because if you are to become a Stalfos, then, well, your spirit needs to be around. You can't be a spirit and become a Stalfos. If you're a spirit and you're undead, then you become a Poe. That is just Zelda canon and Zelda lore. Rather than become a Stalfos, you need to be an adult without a fairy and get lost in the Lost Woods. And here with Termina, you will find everything you loved about Majora's Mask is present. You have the Goron Village, you have the woods, the Great Bay area, as well as Clock Town. As far as whether or not the players will go here will remain to be seen. But the fact that it is there, I wanted to give an option that players could potentially visit if they so chose, or can even be from. When I made the continent of SKYLOFT, I really wanted to bring this place in and have SKYLOFT basically be a very specific region. I wanted to have the floating island in the sky of SKYLOFT be a thing that the players could potentially go to in this game. And I had a feeling of just putting it outside of Hyrule could make it mythical enough to make it rather fascinating. So there's SKYLOFT the continent, and then there's SKYLOFT proper. And players could potentially be from SKYLOFT proper if they so chose, but there'd be a lot of logistics as to how they would need to do it. And from there we have technically 3 countries within the continent of SKYLOFT. You have Holodrum, Labrina, and then Hytopia. The problem with Holodrum and Labrina is that both don't really have that much of a personality in the game. It feels basically like an alternate version of Hyrule. Hyrule is very much like the standard fantasy that we come to expect, with a little bit of steampunk elements, and then Clock Town is very advanced in its technology, very close to Eberron. Holodrum and Labrina, I decided to make distinct personalities. Holodrum, I decided to make more arcane. So if you really wanted to be someone who's of the arcane, there are arcane colleges here that you could go to or be from. There will be a lot of studious mages on this continent, and potentially a lot of great libraries, potentially even greater, that can be found within Castletown of Hyrule. Because SKYLOFT proper is a part of Holodrum, technically speaking, Holodrum is one of the few militaristic forces that actually has an air force attached to it, because the Knights of SKYLOFT with their Lockwings are a branch of the military. Labrina, on the flip side, is more militaristic. They get a lot of their resources from selling weaponry and armor. They are known for their militaristic power and the ability to conquer. If I was to attach it to anything, it would be the closest thing that I have to an outright evil country in this world. Even then, that's not necessarily true. But if we wanted to put the evil D&D country, Labrina would most likely be the case, but that's not necessarily true. It's actually written in the lore of the world that Labrina tried to conquer one of the forests in order to feed their militaristic machine. However, the Kokiri of the forest managed to fight them back, and then through the spirit guardians as well as the Kokiri, they managed to make a truce, and the Labrinites would not go any further. So there's actually an uneasy truce, and if someone was to be a Kokiri from that region, they could potentially be more combative, along with Deku Scrubs that are over there. So if you wanted to be from there, you totally could. You'd potentially be a little bit more warlike in nature as a result. Hytopia is interesting. It actually kind of has a personality, and that personality is that it's all about fashion. It is one of the smaller countries in SKYLOFT. It is also one of the most recent. Being inspired by the game where it almost became like a pseudo-colony for HYRULE by the end of it, Hytopia started out as a colony in the SKYLOFT region by HYRULE a long time ago. The purpose there was to start a trade with those of Labrina, as well as even getting Ordon wool, which is famous because of the Ordon goats that can be found there. Hytopia doesn't necessarily have a big militaristic force. Anything that it does have is usually on loan from HYRULE. While they are technically still their own country, they are still somewhat under the rule of the King of HYRULE. So that's why they can have them, the guards and the military over there to help protect Hytopia in case anything were to happen. The primary export of Hytopia is that of, well, as it sounds, fashion. Fashion is huge in Hytopia. It was huge in the game, and it's huge here. So if you go here, you'll find a lot of clothing, and who knows, maybe some stuff they'll be able to help boost some of your stats. Who knows? This archipelago features a wide variety of islands, some that have not been charted yet, actually. One of the more famous ones is that of Dragon Roost Island, where the god Valu is from, as well as even some Rito. So if a Rito wanted to be from here, rather than taking cold resistance like their more Arctic brethren, what they would do is they would actually take a fire resistance trait. This is to simulate them growing up in fire this whole time, as well as just give a little bit of personality to the world. Here you can also find the Forest Haven, and if anyone leaves who's from the Forest Haven, they are most likely a Korok using a leaf of some kind in order to leave it. However, potentially other Kokiri as well as Deku Scrubs could be found within the Forest Haven. CALATIA actually doesn't come from any Zelda game, but is rather a reference from a Nintendo Power comic. In this comic, Link states that his home country is actually that of CALATIA. So I decided to give a little bit of a reference to that by making it the southernmost continent, not necessarily a country. This continent is interesting. It's not only an Arctic place, but as you can see by the map, there are weird things about it. There are weird crystals. These crystals can be found all the way throughout the map. These are really sought after, especially by magic users, as they are things that can be used to potentially enhance arcane and divine magic, as they almost seem to have a weird connection to how magic works in this world. And down here in the southernmost continent, you can also find a second Mirror of Twilight. One of the benefits of running a game that's not in generic Fantasyland, but has a name attached to it, be it an official setting like Greyhawk or Faerun, or just a homebrew one like Exandria, though I guess Exandria is technically official content now, but you get the point, is that it has an identity. I want to keep as much Zelda in this world as possible, while still giving it a little bit of my own flair. You will still see familiar settings and sights, as well as even potential nods to some of the games within the franchise. But I do want to make this a little bit my own setting as well, while still holding true to the thing that makes something Zelda. And at its heart, it's about exploration and adventure, while still keeping those classic locations.